If I'm a conservative in America and I'm watching CNN, just for the straight middle of the road, that's what I hear for 15 minutes, is it's great, and then Lonely Scott.
The internet exploded. Bill Maher, known for his razor-sharp wit and no-holds-barred commentary, just went nuclear on CNN's Kaitlan Collins. It wasn't a polite disagreement. It was a takedown that left viewers stunned and the replay button smoking. But what started as a single fiery exchange has now ignited into a full-blown media war, and the gloves are off.
It does look, I mean, and when you see the path, it does look like tokenism. It's kind of like the same as The View.
Remember that moment? Maher, live on air, didn't just question Collins, he practically accused her and CNN of blatant bias. It was raw, it was unfiltered, and it instantly went viral. This wasn't your typical cable news squabble, it felt like a dam had broken, unleashing a torrent of long-simmering frustration.
What is the most pressing question, Kaitlan, you would ask VP Harris if you had the chance? Ooh.
I have a lot of questions for her, but I do think I would ask about, where she stood when she was running as a candidate and for the 2020 Democratic primary and where she stands on a lot of issues now.
But listen to this. What made the exchange even more explosive was the way Maher refused to back down. While most guests might have softened their tone or pivoted to safer ground, Maher doubled down, calling out what he saw as a pattern of slanted coverage and narrative control. Collins, visibly taken aback, tried to steer the conversation back to neutral territory, but the damage was done. The audience could feel the tension shift. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a reckoning.
She's criticized a lot by Republicans for reversing her positions. I think also, Donald Trump has reversed a lot of his positions from covering those. But I think I would be interested in her evolution and where her instincts are and what she learned from governing with a moderate like President Biden.
And the response? Immediate and polarizing. Social media lit up with clips, commentary, and hot takes from both sides of the aisle. Some hailed Maher as a truth-teller, finally saying the quiet part out loud. Others accused him of grandstanding and undermining journalistic integrity. Either way, the moment struck a nerve. Not just with viewers, but within the media landscape itself.
You guys have that debate?
It's ABC debate.
ABC debate.
If it happens, I still think it's an open question of
really?
whether or not it happens.
Trump's gonna go. He's got to.
You think Trump is going to pull out?
I think Trump is nervous about it. I think I talked to a lot of sources in his world. I think he has really struggled with it. It's not just a narrative or a talking point from Democrats.
That initial clash wasn't the end. It was merely the opening salvo. What followed was a clear escalation. Maher didn't back down. In fact, he leaned in harder, pressing his point with a mix of sarcasm and surgical precision. Collins, seemingly unfazed on the surface, held her ground with the practiced poise of someone used to navigating high-stakes interviews. But beneath the civility, the tension was unmistakable.
He really has struggled with how to combat her. And I think going into that debate, he does not really want to do it. I think it's difficult, if not impossible, for him to pull out because his campaign manager had cards printed that said anywhere, anytime, any place for President Biden, and it would look weak. But I don't think he's looking forward to it at this point.
It gets crazier. As the conversation unfolded, it became clear this wasn't just a spirited disagreement, it was an ideological standoff. Maher began dissecting not just individual stories, but the broader editorial slant of CNN itself, challenging the network's role in framing national narratives. Collins responded with pointed defenses, citing journalistic standards and fact-based reporting, but the back and forth only highlighted the growing chasm between legacy media and its critics.
I'm not a political pundit trying to analyze this stuff, but I do know that it's a very easy debate to win. So all you have to say is, look, you had 4 years, I had 4 years. When I was president, and when you were president, here's the differences. Gas prices are up 50% when you're vice president. Electricity prices up 30%. Grocery up 22%. The list keeps going. Taxes were lower under Trump. They raised them under Biden and Harris. Regulations were lower under Trump. They raised them under Biden and Harris. Immigration numbers way down. They actually tried to stop the problem. Record numbers under Biden and Harris. This is a very easy debate to win because on the metrics, it's very easy to show side by side.
This wasn't just about differing opinions anymore. It was shaping up to be a significant flashpoint in the ongoing war over media trust, bias, and accountability. The segment quickly evolved from a typical interview into something far more consequential, a live, unfiltered confrontation that captured the very essence of the cultural and political divide dominating public discourse today.
You made press because you were on Stephen Colbert's show, and he said something like, you guys at CNN just report the news straight, and the crowd burst into laughter.
At the heart of Maher's critique, the charge that Collins had abandoned any pretense of neutrality. He didn't mince words. He flat out suggested she wasn't just reporting the news. She was actively shaping it, molding narratives to fit a predetermined agenda. And the focal point of that accusation? Donald Trump. Maher argued that coverage of Trump had moved beyond scrutiny or skepticism and entered the realm of obsession, where every word, every gesture was filtered through a lens of hostility.
Look, I'm on CNN now. I guess we're on it right now. I mean, they show this show the next night. I don't know I don't know how we get away with it with all the, but they do.
But that's not all. Maher went further, implying that Collins, and by extension CNN, had become participants in the political theater rather than observers of it. He questioned whether the network had crossed a line, trading journalistic integrity for partisan gain, blurring the boundaries between commentary and reporting. The accusation hung in the air like smoke after a blast. Had objective journalism been thrown out the window? Was the press still holding power to account, or simply playing power's game?
And all these dirty jokes, but I'm glad, and I'm a big rooter for CNN, but that tells you a lot, doesn't it?
For viewers, it was a jarring moment, not just because of what was said, but because someone had finally said it out loud on live television and to the face of one of cable news's rising stars. The tension reached a boiling point during what should have been a routine, even harmless question. Maher, with a raised eyebrow and a hint of mischief, asked Collins a straightforward query. What would you ask Vice President Kamala Harris? It was the kind of question any seasoned journalist should be able to answer without breaking a sweat.
On CNN being a place of credibility, I mean, look at what just happened in Chicago. We had 300 people from CNN on the ground covering that convention. There were several reporters from just our team alone on the floor, bringing it in real time to people. And I think CNN puts resources behind things and just brings a level of news that you don't get anywhere else.
But listen to this. Instead of offering a direct response, Collins immediately pivoted. Not to Harris, not to policy, not even to the broader Democratic platform, but straight back to Donald Trump. Her deflection wasn't subtle. It was immediate and unmistakable. And in that moment, something clicked. Maher leaned back, almost in disbelief, as if to say, exactly.
If I'm a conservative in America and I'm watching CNN, just for the straight middle of the road, that's what I hear for 15 minutes, is it's great, and then Lonely Scott. It does look, I mean, and when you see the path, it does look like tokenism. It's kind of like the same as The View. It's like it's almost better to have nobody there, like MSNBC, than to have this.
To many watching, that dodge became Exhibit A in the case against her impartiality. It wasn't just an awkward moment, it was revealing. Here was a golden opportunity to demonstrate even-handedness, to show she could scrutinize both sides. Instead, Collins circled right back to the same talking point, reinforcing Maher's central argument that her focus was singular, unwavering, and deeply partisan. What should have been a simple exchange turned into a lightning rod, proof in the eyes of critics that the media wasn't just covering Trump, it was fixated on him, to the exclusion of everything else. Why the constant Trump talk? Why did every road, no matter where the conversation started, seem to lead back to him? Maher didn't hold back on his theory, and it struck a nerve. He suggested that Trump wasn't just a subject for Collins, he was her trump card, a guaranteed generator of heat, clicks, and viral moments. In Maher's view, Trump had become less of a political figure and more of a content strategy, a reliable way to spark outrage, drive engagement, and keep viewers glued to the screen. But here's the kicker. Every mention, every carefully crafted question that veered toward Trump started to feel less like journalistic curiosity and more like narrative engineering. Maher argued that it wasn't about informing the public, it was about feeding a storyline, one that kept the audience locked in a cycle of fear, anger, and confirmation bias. Trump wasn't just being covered, he was being used, and that raised a bigger, more unsettling question. Was this really about the news anymore, or had it morphed into a ratings-driven obsession, where the line between journalism and entertainment had all but vanished? For Maher, and for many watching, the answer seemed increasingly clear, and it didn't bode well for the credibility of the media at large. Bill Maher wasn't just a passive observer in the conversation. He intervened. In classic Maher fashion, he cut through the noise, bypassing the usual cable news courtesies to call things exactly as he saw them. With surgical precision, he confronted Collins head-on, challenging not only her responses, but the underlying tactics he believed she was employing. And you could feel it. The energy in the room shifted. The usual rhythm of interview and reply was broken, replaced by a palpable tension as Maher laid bare what he saw as a predictable playbook, one where every detour led back to Trump. Every critique was one-sided, and every answer seemed carefully calibrated to avoid balance. He wasn't rude, but he was relentless, and that made it all the more effective. It was a rare rare moment of live accountability. Not scripted, not sanitized, just raw and unsparing. And for once, the media figure being questioned wasn't the one holding the cards. Collins, usually composed and in control, began to visibly squirm under the pressure. Her smile turned tight, her tone clipped. She tried to maintain her footing, but Maher had already pulled back the curtain. In that instant, the power dynamic flipped, and the audience knew it. This wasn't just about one interview. It was about what that interview revealed. In real time, Maher peeled back the polished, carefully curated curtain that CNN has long held up as proof of its fairness and balance. For years, the network has insisted it plays it straight, holding power to account without fear or favor. But Maher's blunt, unforgiving assessment suggested otherwise. He called it what he believed it was, an illusion, a carefully constructed image of neutrality that, under scrutiny, didn't hold up. And in that moment, the cracks started to show. The patterns, the pivots, the predictable talking points, they weren't just isolated slips. To Ma, they formed a clear and consistent strategy, one aimed not at informing, but at reinforcing a particular worldview. But it gets worse. Maher wasn't alone in seeing it. Millions of viewers watching from across the political spectrum saw the same tells, the deflections, the focus on Trump, the resistance to genuine balance. For them, this wasn't just about Collins, it was about a network that had, in their eyes, abandoned its journalistic center, while still insisting it hadn't moved an inch. The evidence Maher argued was mounting, and what made it so powerful was that it wasn't a partisan critique. It was coming from someone who had spent years criticizing both sides. That's what made this moment land so hard. It wasn't just another voice in the echo chamber. It was someone stepping outside of it, pulling back the veil and saying out loud what many had only whispered. Then came the debate, the one Collins claimed Trump was supposedly dreading. She framed it as a looming showdown, a moment Trump was allegedly trying to avoid, perhaps out of fear, uncertainty, or lack of preparation. It was a tidy narrative, one that fit neatly into a broader media portrayal of Trump as evasive and on the defensive. But Maher wasn't buying it. He saw the situation through a different lens, one grounded not in speculation but in cold, hard political metrics. Gas prices were up, inflation remained stubborn, the border a mess. Public confidence in the current administration was shaky at best. To Maher, the idea that Trump was dreading a debate under these conditions was not just inaccurate, it was laughable. This is an open goal, he argued, comparing the debate stage to a penalty kick with no goalie. If anything, Maher suggested, it was the Democrats who had more to fear. Trump, with his uncanny ability to command attention and simplify complex issues into digestible soundbites, would walk into that arena with a full arsenal of voter frustrations at his back. And if the economy or immigration came up, as they inevitably would, he'd be ready. Collins's insistence that Trump was the one running scared suddenly felt detached from the political reality most Americans were living, and Maher made that disconnect painfully clear. It wasn't just a disagreement over strategy. It was a clash between media narrative and measurable reality. And for viewers, it raised the uncomfortable question, was the press reflecting the world as it is, or as they wanted it to be? Even a seemingly offhand comment on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert managed to underscore just how deeply the perception of CNN's bias has seeped into the public consciousness. During a casual back and forth, the mere mention of CNN reporting straight news was met not with silence or contemplation, but with loud, knowing, involuntary laughter from the audience. And that reaction spoke volumes. It wasn't just a punchline, it was a reflection of something far more telling, a growing belief that CNN's image as a neutral, fact-driven outlet no longer holds water for much of the public. The audience's response wasn't outrage or confusion, it was recognition, as if they were all in on the same unspoken joke that CNN, despite its branding, had become a player in the political game, not just a referee. But that's the real takeaway. When satire and comedy shows, traditionally spaces where truth is cloaked in humor, start getting closer to the public's perception of reality than the news itself, something is off. The laughter wasn't just about CNN. It was about the widening gap between what media institutions say they are and how people increasingly experience them. In that single moment, Colbert's audience unintentionally echoed the very critique Maher had been making all along, that the network's claim to objectivity isn't just being questioned, it's being mocked. Maher then turned his attention to a familiar and increasingly transparent tactic in mainstream media, the token conservative, that one lone right-leaning voice, often moderate, carefully selected, and rarely disruptive, placed on a panel otherwise dominated by left-leaning commentators. To the casual viewer, it might look like balance, but Maher wasn't convinced. Was this genuine ideological diversity or just theater, a strategic move designed not to foster real debate but to deflect accusations of bias? By including a single conservative voice, networks like CNN could point to the panel and say, "See, we're fair." But as Maher pointed out, the setup often felt curated, even contrived. The conservative guest was rarely someone who challenged the dominant narrative too forcefully. More often, they played the foil, the necessary opposition to maintain the illusion of objectivity. But listen to this. Maher Maher argued that this wasn't balance, it was camouflage, a way to maintain credibility while still controlling the overall direction of the conversation. The result? Viewers got the impression of open dialogue, but the boundaries of what could be said and who got to say it were still tightly managed. In Maher's eyes, this tokenism didn't solve the problem of bias, it highlighted it. It was proof that networks were more concerned with the appearance of fairness than the practice of it. And for an audience increasingly skeptical of media institutions, that kind of performative balance only deepened the distrust. The consequences of this perceived bias? Declining viewership. Audiences once loyal are now drifting away, not necessarily toward another network, but away from mainstream media altogether. And Maher, never one to shy away from uncomfortable truths, subtly but unmistakably pointed to the reason why. People are tuning out, not because they don't care about the news, but because they're tired of the performance. Tired of panels that feel pre-scripted, tired of narratives that seem one-dimensional, and tired of networks that claim neutrality while clearly favoring one side. Maher didn't need to shout it, the implication was clear. The disconnect is costing them. But here's where it hits hardest. Maher hinted that the real problem wasn't just political bias, it was a growing sense of inauthenticity. Viewers aren't just disagreeing with the coverage, they're losing trust in the institution itself. And the numbers, he suggested, back it up. Ratings are dipping, engagement is down, and the once dominant grip of networks like CNN is loosening. In Maher's eyes, this isn't just about content, it's about credibility. And once that slips, no amount of token opposition voices or slick production values can bring an audience back. The erosion of trust isn't sudden, it's gradual, cumulative, and deeply damaging. And if the media doesn't recognize that, Maher implied, they risk becoming irrelevant to the very public they claim to serve. Fast forward to the Republican National Convention, a moment that should, in theory, be a showcase of political ideas and party unity. But Maher painted a very different picture of CNN's presence there. In his view, they weren't on the ground as objective journalists seeking facts or offering balanced coverage. Instead, he described them as predators circling the event with cameras and microphones, hunting for a misstep, a gaffe, a single soundbite that could be looped endlessly to reinforce a narrative of chaos, division, and extremism. But it gets clearer. Maher wasn't saying journalists shouldn't hold political events accountable. Far from it. His issue was with the intent behind the coverage. According to him, CNN didn't arrive with an open mind. They arrived with a pre-written script. All they needed was the right footage to plug into the pre-approved storyline. And when you go looking for disaster, Maher warned, you'll always find something that looks like it. The result? Coverage that felt less like news and more like confirmation bias in real time. Moments of normalcy, policy discussion, or unity were largely ignored or downplayed, while fringe voices and outbursts were amplified to represent the whole. It wasn't reporting, it was narrative curation. And for Ma, this wasn't just bad journalism, it was dangerous, because when a major news outlet becomes so openly invested in portraying one side as a caricature, it doesn't just alienate those being covered, it undermines the credibility of the press itself. At a time when trust in media is already fragile, Maher's critique landed hard. If you show up to a political convention looking for monsters, don't be surprised when the public starts thinking you're the one wearing the mask. The contrast with CNN's coverage of the Democratic National Convention was nothing short of stark. It was as if a switch had been flipped. Suddenly the tone softened, the scrutiny eased, and the entire atmosphere felt less like journalism and more like a carefully choreographed celebration. Every speech was met with glowing praise, every moment wrapped in a sense of historic importance. Potential controversies glossed over or ignored entirely. And Maher wasn't subtle about it. To him, this wasn't balanced reporting. It was PR, a polished, upbeat infomercial for the Democratic Party, dressed up as news coverage. The contrast was so glaring that it didn't require a deep political analysis. Viewers could feel it. The difference in tone, in framing, in what was highlighted and what was conveniently left out spoke louder than any editorial statement ever could. But listen to this. Maher argued that this wasn't just about bias, it was about credibility erosion in real time. When one party is portrayed as chaotic and dangerous while the other is bathed in praise, the audience starts to question the motives behind the coverage. And once that doubt sets in, it spreads. It doesn't just taint the story, it calls the entire institution into question. To Maher, the issue wasn't about who gave the better speech or had the cleaner convention. It was about consistency of standards. Journalism, he reminded viewers, isn't supposed to cheer for a side, and when it does, it stops being journalism, it becomes propaganda with a press pass. The ultimate insult? Maher compared CNN to The View, a daytime talk show known more for its loud opinions, emotional debates, and occasional detachment from facts than for hard-hitting journalism. On the surface, it might have sounded like a throwaway jab, a bit of comedic flair. But make no mistake, this was a damning indictment, not just of style, but of substance. To liken CNN, once considered a pillar of serious, sober reporting, to a talk show often dismissed as partisan infotainment, was to suggest that the network had abandoned its journalistic mission. Maher wasn't just mocking their tone, he was calling out what he saw as a fundamental shift, from fact-based reporting to performative commentary, from investigation to ideological reinforcement. But it cuts deeper. The View, for all its entertainment value, doesn't pretend to be a newsroom. CNN, on the other hand, still clings to the identity of a straight news outlet, even as its coverage increasingly mirrors the hyperbolic, emotionally charged discourse seen on daytime panels. That, to Maher, was the real problem. Not that CNN had opinions, but that it pretended not to. By drawing that comparison, Maher crystallized what many viewers have long felt but couldn't quite articulate: that CNN's evolution wasn't just a matter of tone or talent. It was a loss of credibility, a descent from journalism into ideological theater. And in the world of news, there may be no harsher critique than being told you've become indistinguishable from a talk show designed to provoke, not inform. Bill Maher didn't just critique CNN, he exposed a perceived chasm between their claims of neutrality and their actual behavior. The confrontation with Kaitlan became a flashpoint, highlighting accusations of bias, a relentless anti-Trump focus, and a strategy of tokenism. The comparison to The View underscored a significant loss of credibility. For many, the illusion of fair and balanced coverage at CNN has shattered, leaving a wake of skepticism and dwindling viewership. The question now is, can CNN reclaim the trust it appears to have lost, or is this the new reality of a once dominant news network?